Good evening. Welcome to the April 7th Village Board work session. We're coming to you on a Tuesday this evening because tomorrow is Passover. Happy Passover to all who observe. And before we get the agenda underway, I wanted to invite any trustees who might have announcements that you'd like to bring to the front. Anybody have any announcements?
I will start. Good evening, Mayor, fellow trustees, and everyone else joining tonight. My announcement is building off an announcement that I'm sure you're going to make, Madam Mayor, about your daily updates. I'm also giving daily updates, but in Spanish. So I'm echoing the mayor's comments and then adding my own and putting those on the Padres Hispanos page, as well as my own page on Facebook. So look for those Spanish language updates on coronavirus and the village. Thanks.
Anyone else? Manny or Rika?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Manny.
Thank you. I just want to keep thanking everybody in the village government, police department, fire department, EMS, DPW, building department, everybody in the town, everybody that is actually doing a lot of voluntary work for our community. I really want to thank them for the hard work that you guys have been doing. So I thank you so much for everything on these times that we all are going through. Thank you for the great work. This to me, there's no words to actually say how much I'm proud of being part of this community. I want to send my condolences to families that have lost relatives, they have lost brothers, they have lost sisters, they have lost friends. It's a really sad moment to be living right now. So I wanted to send all my condolences to the people that have gone through this. And if there's anything that we can do, please let us know. So thank you so much.
Rika?
Thanks, Manny. I'm going to echo everybody's words. I have been sort of floored by the number of sort of ad hoc organizations. In one way we're all isolated, but another way, all these groups that have organically formed and using, whether it's social media or other ways in all the neighborhoods of just people helping their neighbors. Today was a nice day. People were taking walks, riding bikes. So many of us all year round have always been running from here to there and everywhere else. So it's sort of been interesting to watch what happens when the world sort of comes to a bit of a standstill. Not for everybody. We have a lot of first responders out there doing sort of Herculean feats, really on the front line. And, it's something we're going to have to remember for a long time about who the heroes are. We discussed this, I think, last week, but it keeps going forward. As every day you hear that more nurses or aides in the nursing homes or doctors and all of the first responders, police officers are really, I think, suffering under the strain, physically, emotionally, mentally, etc. I think it's just really quite amazing to see everybody, especially not really come through. I do wish everybody, thank you for mentioning that before, tomorrow is the first night of Passover, usually a day of stories, big meals with lots of family around. Like many, I will be celebrating it virtually. I've used the words more often the past 2 weeks than I've used in my life, which is the word silver linings. So I keep looking for silver linings under a very dark cloud, but I'll tell you, I now get to spend Passover with family members I normally don't see, but we're able to do it virtually. So for me, that's been a silver lining, and I hope that is the case for others, for Passover, for Easter, for anything you celebrate religiously or otherwise, birthdays, etc. I hope that there is some silver linings to the use of technology that we're now able to do. So I'm wishing everybody a good holiday for the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just, I wanted folks to know that Bob Fritchie will be joining us. He's having a little technical difficulty, so hopefully he'll be coming on board soon. This is still a learning curve for all of us. And I will just add a couple of items to the very heartfelt sentiments that my colleagues have already expressed. Every day we get an update from the county on the number of positive cases in the village of Ossining. It goes up every day. And we heard from Lindsay Farrell last week, which about part of the reason why our numbers are as high as they are is because we are so fortunate to have the Ossining door, and they were at the forefront of testing folks. And so as we get those results back, most of the positive results we have are coming from testing done at the open door, and we are at 300 today, 300 on the nose today. As Trustee Lopez mentioned, I just this week started doing daily Facebook Live updates, and I will, if I am doing it late enough in the afternoon, which I have for the first couple of days, I'll provide the updated number of the positive cases. But I also invite people to email me any questions in advance. Some questions I might have to look into and reach out to our staff or do some research on to provide you an answer. So if you get me the question in advance, I'll do my best. And one of them that was asked was the morbidity rate in Ossining. And while we are told the number of positive cases and a very clear number, we don't have a clear number of the number of Ossining residents that have passed because of this virus. And frankly, my understanding from the epidemiologists is that we really won't have an accurate number of the total impact of the coronavirus for quite some time, months or years, before we know. As you know, many people are not being tested who may have the virus. In my conversation with our town clerk, we do know that there are people in Ossining who have died from the coronavirus. Occasionally it has been included as the cause of death on the death certificates from Ossining. There are also some folks who have passed away that we know have had contact with people who had tested positive, but the cause of death is listed as another underlying health concern, which most likely contributed to their succumbing to whatever the particular cause was in this case. And also anyone who from Ossining who may be transported to a hospital, if they pass away when they're in the hospital, the death certificate would be issued not by Ossining, but by the community where the hospital is located. So if you're wondering how we are being directly impacted here in Ossining, in every way possible. And so that is why we are continuing to remind everyone every day to be taking all the precautions that you can, particularly staying home and social distancing. And we, having in mind that the tremendous agony and impact that this virus is having on our community, this week the village lowered all of our flags to half staff. Thank you for the village staff for making that happen. I certainly look forward to a day when we can leave the flags all the way up on the flagpole again. All right. There is plenty more for us to talk about. We have a heavy agenda. Are we moving right into this first item that I'm going to go dark on? Because I'll just let folks know. Unless there's staff, do you have any opening comments, Karen, about anything other than our agenda item?
No.
Okay. Well then, I'm recusing myself from this particular topic, so I will be watching, but you will not see my video for a while, just the same as I would step back from the table if we were in a room together. So let me just figure out how to do that. There we go.
So from here, I just want to let Mr. Balter know if you bring up the bottom of your screen and if you remember how to share it. Oh, sorry.
Okay, let me just do I want to provide a little background. So tonight we're pleased to have Bill Balter of Wilder Balter Associates to talk about his proposal for the village-owned DPW site on Water Street. Many of you may remember, I hope everybody who's on this panel does, that over the summer, the board issued a request for qualifications for a developer for a mixed-income, mixed-use development at the DPW site. And that was this past summer. We hired Rose Noonan of Housing Action Council to facilitate this. And we ended up in July with 9 developers visiting the site, being briefed by board and staff on the site specs. And this was all driven from The needs identified in the housing needs assessment that Kevin Dworka did in 2017, which talked about the need for quality, affordable housing options in Ossining. So we were, of the 9 developers, 8 submitted proposals. We went through a very, very thorough review. Those proposals were based on certain objectives so that were issued in the RFQ, and that included mixed income development with affordability at various levels, income levels, greater connectivity to Main Street, the ability to finish the Sing Sing Kill Walkway and a public park, adequate parking area, as well as community space that can be used for many community benefits, but not limited to also using it for possible alternative education space for the school district in light of their need for different types of spaces for some of the educational programs they run. So we went through a very thorough review process that involved Rose Noonan Housing Action Council staff, village engineer Paul Fraioli, and myself, Board of Trustees. And in February, the entire board met with 3 finalists, and Wilder Balter was determined to be the best fit for this particular project. I am happy to introduce him now so he can speak about his proposal.
Before that starts, just a correction. I don't think the entire board met. I think 4 out of the 5 board members.
I'm sorry,
met.
that's correct. The mayor has
Okay.
recused herself. So yes,
From
four
the
of
beginning.
the 5
Okay.
members. Yes, correct. Thank you for that. And with that, I'd like to introduce Bill Balter from Wilder Balter Associates.
Mr. Balter, you have to unmute.
There we go. Okay, can you all hear me? Good. Hi, I'm Bill Balter. I'm president of Wilder Balter Partners. This is my first Zoom meeting, so I apologize for how rough this may be. But this is great that we can do this at all. So I'm going to take you through a PowerPoint in a moment. That was the PowerPoint presentation that we used for our interview in February. You know, it's a little bit flat because I did it to answer questions primarily. I'm going to run through it sort of quickly, and then I hope to just answer your questions after that. First and foremost, I just want to tell you how excited we all are. We're a company of about 110 people, construction, development, and management. We're located in Westchester County in the old Reader's Digest campus, where we are in the office building there, which is where our office is. I live in Mount Kisco, and I used to live in Ossining. So with that, I'm going to share my and do our presentation. Oh, this says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you hear me?
We're setting it up. Just one moment.
Okay.
You should have it now.
Okay, good. Okay. You can all see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So again, Wilder Balter Partners, we have been in business. I've been in this business since about 1990 for about 30 years. We are developers of primarily residential and mixed income developments, mixed use developments. In Westchester County, we've done about 20 communities. I'm going to show you a map in a few minutes. But basically, we've been very active in the New York metro area, particularly Westchester County and the Hudson Valley. This is where I actually lived. I started my business when I had lived at 19 Independence Place, which is probably about a quarter of a mile from this site. My office was here when we started, and I moved to Peekskill, and then we were in Elmsford for about 24 years. And about 2 years ago, we went to our office in Chappaqua. This is a map of our developments in the Hudson Valley, Metro New York area. We have done developments on Long Island up to Saratoga County. It doesn't show on this map, but we also did an affordable development in St. Thomas, of all places. I'm going to show you a few of the developments we've done because they're relevant to what we're to the two elements of what we're proposing in the DPW site. So what you're looking at now is what's called the Cupola Building. This was the original Reader's Digest corporate offices. This was the first building built on that site in 1937. About 3 years ago, we started on an adaptive reuse, and we converted the office building into 64 mixed income apartments that served people from 40 to 90% of area median income. It was a very cool adaptive reuse of the building. Basically saved all of the architectural features on the outside, and we had very cool apartments on the inside. A lot of people have seen this. It's possible some of you on this call have seen this building. It's been shown a lot by Westchester County. It just really came out terrifically. It's obviously been pretty much 100% occupied. Here, to give you a sense of the income ranges, 40 to 90% of AMI for the market and workforce means that we went from about $850, including heat and hot water, up to about $1,900 for our most expensive workforce unit, including heat and hot water. And we also had a few market rate units in here that rented for as much as about $6,300 a month, including heat and hot water. So it's when I say mixed income, it's a very broad range. Pine Brook Condominiums is an affordable condominium that we did. It was a development that Westchester County was very involved in. It's also a brownfield site. This was the first brownfield site that we did as a company. We completed this about 5 or 6 years ago. In Mount Kisco, we did development that was a mixed income development that had 34 luxury homes that you're looking at. And then in the back of this photograph is an open space that we created where we provided walking trails. We gave a deed restriction, put a deed restriction on the property, and we built parking and had a conservation easement to the benefit of the Westchester Land Trust, who maintains the trails through the property. And then in the top of the frame, which you can't see, is also there are 90 senior moderate income condos that we sold for on average, about $265,000. This we completed about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. In another mixed income development that we did, this is a Jacobs Hill. It's 161 units. The two phases on the right and the left share the common facility in the middle, which is about a 3,500-foot clubhouse and a pool, and a big open space that we preserved. We're currently building the first of two phases in New Rochelle. Phase one is 380 units. It is a cool project in many ways and has a lot of elements that we're going to have in Ossining. It's mixed income. This one is market rate on part of it, affordable at 50 and 70% of AMI. It's also a brownfield site, a very complicated brownfield site. This is considered an essential development, so we're actually building through the COVID crisis. We currently have about 60 people on this job every day, building it out. Phase two on the bottom, it's the left building. We expect to start that in about a year. Also in New Rochelle is a 184-unit market rate development that we're starting in about 2 months. This development, we're going to wait probably until this is a development that may not be exempt. We probably will have to wait to start until this crisis is over. So it might be 3 or 4 months before we start, depending on when that ends. In Peekskill, we're closing with the county this month and with HFA or HCR 2 months later. This is a mixed income development from 40 to 80% of AMI. It's a brownfield site. It's in downtown Peekskill. It's a gateway property, much like the Ossining DPW site is a gateway property. It has the McGregor Brook that runs through it, similar again to the Sing Sing Kill. It's a complicated brownfield site. This part of Peekskill was the coal stove capital of Westchester County, and this site was a site where they built coal stoves. This building is a LEED Gold building, has a big solar array on the roof, has a green roof courtyard over the parking. It's basically a 7-story building on a 2-acre site. So now I'm going to just get on to our proposal for the DPW site. The team that we assembled, which is what this slide is showing, deals with the fact that it's a complicated site that has a lot of different things that need to get done. Insights, our civil engineer, Ceci, who does a lot of things. In this case, they're going to be our remediation consultant on the Brownfield site. Kanaf Shaw, Linda Shaw, is our environmental attorney. She was also the environmental attorney for Ginsburg on the Harbor Square site. We selected her because A, we worked with her before, and B, she's incredibly familiar with Con Ed and this particular scenario, because our site, the DPW site, is part of a larger, complicated situation that involved Harbor Square and other sites. So we really wanted her involvement. And she has actually had conversations already with Con Ed and with the DEC as a part of our due diligence. And then Stephen Winter Associates is a green building consultant. Our intention is to do this building as a LEED gold building. So we have Stephen Winter on board early on in the process. Blinder Bell is a nationally renowned firm. They've done projects in that many obviously didn't know they were the architect, including Grand Central. They're our architect in New Rochelle on those developments. And we select them here because this is a very complicated site, and we really needed an architect and planner that would work the building to the site, not vice versa. This is a complicated site that climbs up Main Street. There's a lot of topography change. We're trying to incorporate the Greenway extension. There's just a lot that needs to get done, so we really wanted a terrific firm, and they've been great on this project so far. So I'm going to take you through our plans sort of from the beginning. I think all of you on this call have seen these plans before, but the public hasn't, and since this is public, I thought it would be good if I just sort of take the public through. So this development has two buildings. It has a parking garage on the left when you're looking at this picture, and it's 3 levels of parking. In our proposal, we had pointed out that because of the grade of Central, we actually can add another level of parking that we would do if the village wanted us to do it. We meet the zoning compliance of parking in the 3 stories that we're showing here, the 3 levels of parking that we're showing. But if the village wanted to, we could add another layer of parking so there was some public parking as well. So that's on the left. On the right is our building, which starts at 4 stories and climbs up as the grade of Main Street goes up, which you'll see in a few minutes. And then between the parking structure and our building is this linear park that we're creating that incorporates the Sing Sing Kill and an extension of the greenway that you started down from the community center. And as a part of this, we're proposing to continue that. Barb Lindbell's work and our working with them, we went through a lot of things that had been done around the country and things that they'd participated in to look for inspirations of what we're trying to do. That's sort of just what this is showing, as well as this. So this is a sort of an area plan that you're all very familiar with. As you can see, can you all see my mouse when I highlight this? Can you see that? Okay, good. So this is the parking lot that we're talking about. This is the building that climbs the street. And what's green is actually a photograph of the area. So this is the existing greenway coming down, and this is how we would extend it through the site. So this is Central, this is Main. Now this is going to sort of just take you through the property as we climb the site. So now we're looking at the ground floor plan. So you're seeing here the first level of parking. This is our linear park. This is the Sing Sing Kill. This is our beginning of our greenway, which extends up on both sides and goes up to connect to what's already built underneath Central Avenue and the arch culvert the arch that's there. It crosses here much in the way that was proposed in your alternate for when you had these construction drawings done, but then we continue it down. On the first floor of our building, we have retail, approximately 6,000 feet. We also have a community space. And the idea of what we're trying to do with this whole plan is to bring the public through the property, not to exclude the public. So the idea of what we want to do here, and what we liked and thought was a great opportunity here, was to really embrace that this is a gateway property, not just visually, but also from a pedestrian standpoint. It allows people to walk in a really nice way that's a lot nicer than walking up Main Street to get through the property along the Sing Sing Kill. So that's sort of the first level. Then we go up a level. And now this is from the second to the fourth floor. So here it's essentially a 4-story building. You'll see this is a 4-story piece. As we go up Main Street, it gets taller. We're on the second level of parking. Then we get to it's the 6th floor, and what you can see here where it says terrace, this is actually on the roof of the 4th story of the building. So at this point, the building's only 4 stories, and there's a roof terrace for our residents to be able to go out. From this point, obviously, you have great views, and it gets better as you go up. Now, in our original presentation, we had proposed that a possibility for this project was to put an elevator in that would take people from Main Street at this point, and rather than walk up and down the steep part, they could actually take an elevator down and come out at our ground level and walk out of the building. This is something that we did as a possibility of what we could do for the property. I think it's a big decision that we have to make, whether the village and we want to do it or not. It's an expensive thing to build and to maintain, and I think ultimately it's just something we have to decide if that's something we want to do, or if there are better ways to use the resources, the dollars that would be used for that. That's something we can talk about in the future. So now we're on the 7th floor, and here, much like down here, we were on the roof of the 4th floor, we had that terrace. This is on the roof of the 6th floor, and this is another terrace. So again, what we wanted to do is to not have any point in this 8-story building where you're seeing 8 stories of the building from the street. So that's why it's climbing up the hill with Main Street. And as you can see, these are topo lines. So this is 70 feet, this is 60 feet, this is 40 feet and 30 feet. So essentially we're at the building climbing up the street. The other thing you'll notice is that we stayed away from this hill. And the idea of what we're doing here is we want to be able to preserve the green space here. So there's a buffer from the street to our building. So this is just a good look, sort of looking at the building from south to north and seeing the way the building climbs the street. So here is the house that's on that out parcel. And then as you're coming down Main Street, you're coming down, this is literally coming down Main Street toward the train station. As I said, this is just a chart of our units, a chart of our parking. And this is all going to get refined. In our original RFP response, we had 125 units in one of the inquiries that was made of us during the review process. We were asked if we could do a smaller building. I think we have a version of this plan that's 109 units now. This is a mix of different unit types. Basically, it's 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, pretty much averaging 2-bedroom apartments. So that's my brief presentation. Before I open it up for questions, I wanted to just hit a couple of highlights. Just give me 1 minute to look at my notes for a sec. Yeah, so I think first and foremost, this is very exciting for us. We think it's a great plan. I'm going to actually take this screen sharing off if I can figure out how to do that. Stop sharing. Ooh, worked. Okay, so we're really excited about this. It's a cool plan. It's a great opportunity to take something that's a contaminated site. By itself, it's exciting to take something that's in bad shape and turn it into something that's positive. But also this site, particularly as a gateway, it's exciting to do. I think when people sort of look at developments we've done across the county and the state, and we really make an extra effort because we really believe that the last project we did is the advertisement to the community we're going to work in next. So, if you looked at many of our projects, people, I think generally they're very well received, and we want them to be because A, we want to be proud of them, and B, we want the village of Ossining to go to see things we've done before and be excited by what we've done. We're excited to have this be the next such development. Also about this development, it has a tremendous amount of elements that we've done before that are important here. It's a brownfield site, it's a gateway site, it's mixed income housing. It requires tremendous coordination with not just Con Ed, and the DEC, but also with Westchester County, with New York State HCR, and frankly, with the public. I mean, this is a development that will require, in order for it to be successful, it's going to require buy-in from the community. And one of the things we've done for the last 30 years is to work on consensus building with the many stakeholders. And on a development like this, there will be a lot of people that we involve. They'll be involved not just in the public meetings, but we'll do a lot of meetings in people's living rooms or in with groups of people that want to meet with us. And we'll do the legwork and the groundwork to have people understand what a great opportunity this development is, and to show people that we'll adequately address the legitimate concerns that people will have. But at the end of the day, this is a pretty cool development that we think people will be excited about.
Bill, can I just ask that you go back to the participant screen and make me the host again so that I can let one of our trustees back in?
Okay, participant.
And then if you click on the Village of Ossining, it says that you can make me the host.
Make host. Yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Cool. It's all new to me.
Thank you. All right, there we go. So Bob is in now. Thank you.
Hello.
Does anybody have any questions for Bill?
I can start. Thank you, Bill, for your presentation. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll start with an overview of where I am with this project and then get to my questions. So there are a lot of things about this project that I like. I'll start there. I really like the fact that it provides an extension for the Greenway. I think that's great. I was just on the Greenway last weekend with my family, and you started the community center, and then it just kind of ends in a kind of random place, and it feels like there should be more to it. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. I like that this would really be revitalizing that entire area of the village, because it is truly one of the gateways to our village. And right now it looks abandoned. It looks terrible. And for that to be one of the first impressions that people get, I think does not give the right impression of who we are and what we are about. I like that it is not just housing, but you are presenting opportunities for retail and community space and other things which are desperately needed. As I was walking with my family, if we wanted to grab a bottle of water even, there weren't many opportunities to do so right in that area. And so being able to do that there is great. There are also some real concerns that I have. My primary concern is that I want to make sure that we get community involvement in this decision. And this is something that I care a lot about, because when I've been paying attention to what's going on in the village for some time, and when the decision was made last year to put out the request for qualifications and move forward with this process, I didn't have a great awareness that there was this huge project happening on the waterfront, and that process had started and all this was happening. And now that we're at the point where we have chosen a developer and potentially moving forward now with this project in a very real way, it makes me feel like, have we included the public enough in deciding whether to move forward with this project or not in the first place, or what it should look like, as opposed to saying, yes, we have. I don't know if we have. I'm not convinced that we yet have. And that as we discuss stakeholders, I think the way that we classically think about stakeholders is we have your environmentalists, you have your people who are concerned about schools being crowded, you have your people who are concerned about parking, you have your people who are concerned about walkability or whatever else, right? There are a number of interests. Taxes might go up. whatever else. There's all these people that have these different interests and fears that if you move forward with this project, their specific fear will be triggered. And by bringing them into the process, we can say, well, actually, I know you're afraid of your taxes going up, but this is how they're actually going to be impacting. And I know you're afraid of your schools being overcrowded, but this is the actual impact, and so forth and so on. And that is certainly a part of stakeholder management that is real and should happen. And there are also a group of people that take as kind of a first position, because all of that is assuming that the project moves forward in the first place. There's a group of people that say, we don't want housing there to begin with. And so those folks in particular are really not able to get their voice heard at this point because given the context that we are in, they could, I suppose, do something virtually or whatever, but it certainly isn't the same kind of show of force, if you will, as if we were in person. Now, a lot of this is outside of our hands because of the current situation that we're in. Nevertheless, I do want to acknowledge that those folks are out there. And to me, that matters because I don't want to move forward with a project that I know I'm learning as I'm going, but I certainly don't want to feel like I have all of the information to move forward with. So that's my entirely too long preamble. Now to questions. So you responded in some of the emails that we sent previous to this about some key questions that I would like to hear you expand on here, if you will. First is about COVID-19 and how it impacts this project. If you could speak a little bit to that.
Okay. I think that COVID-19 is here now, and we're meeting like this right now. The process here is going to be unfortunately lengthy because it's the nature of the beast. And I think that for the vast majority of this process, we're going to have meetings that people are going to be at. I think in the beginning we won't, but I think that's likely to be the case in a year and 6 months. Certainly going to be the case for a couple of months. But I think at the end of the day, COVID, other than how it changes the world in general, I don't think it's going to have a particular impact on most of the outreach we'll do that we should be doing, nor will it have, I think, a tremendous impact on the planning and village board processes. Because I think by the time we get into the meat of that, which is, let's say, beginning in the fall, when we're in the meat of that, I think that the likelihood is we'll be having meetings in person.
Thank you. One of the other things actually that I forgot to mention that I really like is, and you actually didn't touch on this a lot, is the Brownfield Cleanup. And the point is that there's an environmental concern in that space, so that no matter what you do with that land, there's a certain amount of cleanup that you have to do because there's pollution there functionally. And that is part of what you would be offering as a value to the project. To me, that is great. Could you give us some details on how the Brownfield Cleanup, either the program works or just what that looks like specifically for your project?
Sure. So this site is one of, I think it's 27 sites that Con Ed has a consent decree on with the DEC. And basically what Con Ed's program is they try to sort of push this down their line as long as they possibly can. So that's why the site's been this way for a long time. And similarly, the Harbor Square site was that way for a long time until someone comes in and really forces it all to happen. The Brownfield Cleanup program was created to take a site like this and sort of get it back into use. Well, essentially, this is a site that has coal tar contamination, and it's a serious contamination, and it needs to be remediated. What our intention would be is to work with Con Ed and the DEC to get Con Ed to agree to allow us to take this on. Con Ed will participate financially in a way, and we'll put this in the program, and we'll take over the cleanup. So it sort of does two things. It, A, financially makes sense to allow it to happen, but almost more importantly, or certainly as importantly, it forces the situation to get resolved. Otherwise, the site's going to just sit dormant like it's been for a long time.
Thank you. That makes sense. The last question that I have of this first set, and I want to be mindful of my airtime so that I can have some other folks chime in, is about process. So in the email that we got in talking about process, you said that we would have the conversation that we're having tonight, then move the process along to Con Ed and DEC, and have meeting with stakeholders as the step after that. Can you assure folks that those conversations are not fait accompli, that if the result of those conversations is that there is enough pushback, whether either in force or in number, or just looking at the merits of the arguments that people are making, that there is no way to square the concerns that people have with this project, which I don't know if that is true or not. I'm just assuming that it could be a case. If that is the case, is it true that we could then not move forward with the project? Is that true?
Well, I think what you should understand from my perspective is that the last thing I want to do is be in a quagmire. It's expensive. It's draining with negative emotional energy. The last thing I want is that. So I will do whatever I can up front to ascertain if we have a project. And the best way to do that is to not hide from the people that might be concerned, but to engage with them. So yeah, it's in my interest to do that. And I think normally when people's interests are aligned as they are here, because it's good for people to be able to talk to me about what we plan, and it's good for me to hear what their concerns are. It's in my interest to do it, so you know I'll do it.
Thank you, Bill.
Are you done, Omar? Manny, do you want to go next? I know you have some questions.
I'll go after you, Rika. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm actually playing mayor in this, so you know how it goes
No,
last.
I'll go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just
So
trying to
that's-
stay
that's-
consistent with how we do stuff.
No, totally understand. And thank you, Bill, for coming in, and obviously the situations that we're going through. So one of the questions that I believe my colleague, I don't know if he didn't want to mention or did kind of forgot, but one of them was the amount of units that we have on the residential end, correct? That was one of the questions that was sent out to you, and how did that, the way that we send out the RFQ was, give us an amount of units that you will think that performer will work for you. And it was reduced, as you mentioned at the beginning of your intro. And so one of the biggest concerns that we hear a lot is, how many more residential units do we need? How many more kids are going to come from a particular project, whatever the project it could be. So the concern that we had as a board of the 4 members of the board was the number of units. And part of the question was, 70 units to 110 units. So what does that mean for you, I guess, if you would have to reduce the amount of residential units that you have in your particular project?
So the number of units in the development matters, but I don't think there's anything that's hard and fast. I would say that there's going to be a lot of public improvements on this development, and the cost of those public improvements have to get amortized by something profitable. The units are what's profitable. So that if the development were 70 units and is economically infeasible, that I don't think is as interesting as a development that's 109 units that is economically feasible. And the question really is, is there somewhere in the middle or not? My gut is that this development, that the idea of the units is always a question we're asked about. And I think from an impact standpoint, we have to be able to demonstrate that what we're doing, whether it's 70 units or 109 units, that it won't have unmitigatable negative impacts. I think we'll be able to get there. I also think there's just a lot on this development to do. I mean, the reason this site is sitting is it's expensive to clean up. I think the cleanup by itself is a reason that it needs a certain number of units. we're also going to be creating this greenway. There's a bunch of stormwater improvements that I think the village will want us to do to help with the existing situation. A lot of these, all of the three things I just named really do nothing but cost. They don't help the economics of the development. Where the amenities that we're creating, they don't do a thing to help our rents, because this is a development where we're going to be renting from 40 to 80% of AMI. These are, as in the business, we would say we're renting 10-cent apples for 6 cents. These units, there's going to be, hundreds of people who want to live here. So the fact that we're creating this wonderful environment, we're not getting more rent for it. So we have to be able to pay our costs. So I can't answer you now, could it be 70 units or 100 units or 104 units, but it needs to make economic sense. And I think that, before long, in the next 60 days, we'll really understand the push and pull of the economics, and then I could probably better answer that question. But I truly don't think that, I think there's going to be a lot of things the village wants, and if the difference is at 100 units, the village gets less things, and 109 units, they get more things. The extra 9 units, using that example, is just not going to be that impactful. And, for example, we have our average unit is a 2-bedroom unit. We have 1s, 2s, and 3s. 3s generate some school children, 2s, very few, 1s, basically none. This is just not a development that's going to have a ton of kids, school children. So while I think we need to demonstrate that, and we have not only numbers that are in books, but we have 3,500 apartments that we have developed, own, and manage. A lot of them in Westchester and the Hudson Valley, a lot of them affordable. We know we can demonstrate how many kids are in these developments so that we can get people comfortable with it. And I think ultimately the goal here is going to be to continue to align our interests. And I think we all want to do a terrific development that is not impactful on the village and is perceived as being positive to the village. And I don't really think at the end of the day that will be whether it's 70 units or 109 units. I think it's really, as Omar had said a few minutes ago, it's just the development the village wants, period. I don't think it's going to be about whether it's 70 units or 109 units.
Thank you. So I want to just kind of clarify that in my own and within myself, I guess, and I'm going to ask Paul or Andy to help me with this one. But you mentioned the financial impact in regards to the cleanup. My understanding, being in the board for a little while now, that actually is going to be paid by Con Ed. That's not something that is part of something that you will have to pay, or if you do pay, is going to be reimbursed by Con Ed. So, Paul, help me out with that part of it. Is that correct, my understanding or my recollection?
I know when they did it with Harbor Square, there was a reimbursement component. I don't know if it was a full 100% reimbursement. I believe the cleanup, the difference between this cleanup and Harbor Square is that this cleanup is now under governor's consent order. Not that will play a role in financing of it, but I think it's different now versus when it was a when and if scenario versus now you're under a consent order to clean it up. I think generally you're correct, Trustee Quesada, but based on it being done in conjunction with a residential construction project, there might be some cost to the developer, but I can't speak too clearly to that until we sit down with Con Ed and their consultants.
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Yes, please.
So Con Ed's modus operandi for a site like this is to basically monitor it. And at Harbor Square, there are, as I understand it, wells where they can remove the ooze that sort of makes its way down. And Con Ed has been trying to sort of continue to do that on this site. If Con Ed were to clean up this site, they would not be cleaning it up to a residential standard. They'd be cleaning up to a lower standard. In order to put units above this, we need to clean it up to a higher standard than Con Ed would clean it up. So there will certainly be more cost. We also have, the fact is that we have to get Con Ed to agree to do this with us, to allow us to do this. So we're in a position where Con Ed is We expect will pay a piece of this. We do not expect the Con Ed will pay for the cost of the cleanup. We think they'll pay a piece of it. Our goal is to get through the Brownfield Cleanup program, which generates tax credits, to get a good piece of this paid for through that process. But that's something that, the way that works, and again, we're doing a bunch of them now, and we've done them in the past. That's essentially a tax credit that you get after you complete the cleanup on part of it, and after you complete the project about 2.5, 3 years after the project's complete. So it's all in theory possible, and it's all hopeful to happen, but it's a long journey, and we're the ones taking the risk on it the entire way.
I understand that. I mean, so let me ask you, and I'm going to ask you a question that I usually ask developers when something like this happens. Let's say everything goes well. We finally sign something. We agree upon what we have to do. We know that there's going to be some financial cost to this, and you're trying to get all your approvals done. So let's say, when would you be would you be able to build this project after you get all these approvals? Would you have all the money there if that will be the case? I usually tend to, I have asked developers the same question. And the reason why I'm saying that is because in the past, with the two big projects that we had in Ossining before, when I was in the beginning, in my first year, and then sort of in the middle of my terms, and they all say, yeah, we do have the money, and then they always come back for something else, and they come back for something different. So I just want to kind of bring that up now and kind of see, I would like to hear your answer on that.
Sure. So I think, the best thing that you guys can all do, and probably have done some of it, is to talk into some of the 20 communities we worked in and see how we are to work with, and see if we're honorable and do the things that you're suggesting. I think there always are times when things change. I think in the environment we're in now, where the state says they're $15 billion behind on their budget in terms of the shortfall, and Westchester County spending money, who knows where the funding programs are. I mean, HCR will be asked to put a ton of dollars into this. I think Westchester County will be looking to get $5 million from Westchester County on this development. Before the COVID incident, we had spoken to the state and the county about this development, and it's something they were excited about. Does that change in the next 6 months? I don't know. Again, I have to decide for myself if I think it's a good risk, and so far I think it's a good risk. I think that it doesn't, for me to go spend the time, energy, money, staff time on this versus something else, I'm doing it because I think there's a good chance we'll be successful. So the last thing I want to do is have to go back to you guys with my tail between my legs and say, I just spent $1 zillion, but it doesn't work. I need help. I don't think that's what's intended. I think what's intended is for me to very early on tell the village what we need out of the village, which we did in our responses to the RFQ. And then as we hear more from the state and county, my belief is they probably will be there for this development. There's a lot about this development the state and county have expressed that they do like and they will like. So I think we'll end up fine. But I mean, you're asking me to sort of predict with a crystal ball, and I can't tell you, that nothing's going to change. But I think it's not about me or any other person on this call, on this Zoom meeting. It's really more about the environment we're currently in.
I understand that, and obviously that's again, that was one of the questions that I tend to ask when we're in a regular meeting that I had asked other developers, and very similar, not similar situations as we are right now, but in other circumstances.
Yeah.
And I'm going to kind of piggyback on a little bit of what my colleague Lopez mentioned before was, so obviously there's a lot of stakes into this, and how do we work together with our community? Have you thought about any planned engagement in near future, if that will be the case? Obviously, there's, I can mention, like I mentioned before, and like it was mentioned before, was obviously schools, How do we work together with the schools? How do we work together with other groups of our community? Is that something that if you have done this in other communities, give me a little bit of a sample of what, you know, and how does that works in other communities for you and your developers and development there?
Yeah, I mean, a good example might be in Peekskill, where we're doing this 82-unit development on a very sensitive site in their downtown, literally right in their downtown. The mayor in that case, Mayor Rainey, was very helpful in connecting us with various interested party stakeholders. You know, there were people who were interested in many different aspects of that development, whether it was their equivalent of the CAC. There were people concerned with the architecture who we actually had in a design charrette with us, with our architect, to help to make sure their concerns were addressed. I mean, it's different in every community, but I think a lot of what this will stem from is presumably, hopefully, you guys will, you know, pass a resolution that will, you know, make us, I don't know what you're going to call it, but the designated developer, and we'll begin. And I think the first thing we'll do when we begin is, you know, meet with people in the government to help us identify who the various stakeholders are and have a strategy to reach out to them, because it's in not just your interest, but it's in my interest to reach out to them sooner rather than later. I haven't figured out yet. It would sort of be presumptuous of me to do it on my own. You guys all know your village better than I do. So I'd really be asking for your assistance to help me figure out who we should be reaching out to. In every community, there's certain people, I don't know if it's people on this board, but people who sort of have connections to a lot of the stakeholders. So I'm going to really be looking for some assistance from you guys.
Let me ask you for now, be my last question for now. So after all these meetings with the certain stakeholders and members of the community, obviously, they said, look, we want to see more commercial space. We want to see more, a little bit less than what the residential you guys are proposing. How do you deal with that? Obviously, like I said, your pro forma was based in about 110 units, let's say, at an average. If they said, look, we don't want to see this. We want to see more commercial space. We want to see more, you know, of a mix of a light industrial or more a retail space in here. How does that work for you? Have you have any of those in another project that you are working on it, or do you have worked on it in other communities?
So we've done a bunch of mixed use stuff. The projects we're doing in New Rochelle, which is a total of about 700 apartments in 3 buildings. They all have mixed use, but it's retail on the first floor, in addition to our entries and residential spaces. We don't have any office in any of the buildings, and I think that the challenge in this building, and it's interesting because you're talking about in New Rochelle, you know, one of our buildings is 380 units, one's 173 units, one's 184 units, and even at those numbers, in the downtown of New Rochelle, which is a much more bustling downtown than the waterfront where this site is, it's tough to have critical mass. So, you know, one of the things I always react to when people talk about reducing units is you actually want more units in order to have more viable other uses. You know, if you want to put a coffee shop in this building, you know, for the community, it needs to have sort of a critical mass of bodies that use it. I think the biggest challenge in things other than residential in this building are having enough people there so that whatever you do is economically viable. One of the things we proposed in the building is community space. And the idea with the community space is that it would not be an economic generator, but it would be a space we were providing for the community. And, you know, that works well because we're not relying on the economics of it. I think we proposed about, I forget, maybe 5,000 square feet of retail total. I mean, that retail will be a challenge to make successful because it's just there's not that much going on in this location. I think it's important to have some retail here. I think in the location that we put it, it's important because we want to create a connection between the train station and our site. We want to bring the public into the site. So I think it's important that we have some retail. My guess is that it's not going to be financially viable to have much more retail than what we're showing. And I doubt office will work. I particularly doubt office will work after what we're going through now with COVID-19. The last thing I'll tell you is I'm a real estate developer and I do a lot of residential mixed use work. I would not want to be an office developer right now. I think we're all learning that we don't need that much office.
Thank you.
Bob, you're on the phone. Do you have some comments or questions?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I came in a little late. I was having trouble getting on, so I'm actually on my phone. I caught a part of the elevator conversation from Main Street and that connection from Main Street in. Is that still in the project?
Are you asking me? My view of the elevator is if there's a compelling reason to do it and what the village wants, and that's where the village wants resources to go, we can do it. My sense from the conversations I've had to date with folks is that there probably are better ways to spend the dollars there. But that's something that's not my decision. It's a kind of our decision.
Okay, and then the parking garage. In your presentation, your original presentation, you showed us a 3-level garage, and then with the options of adding the 4th level, that would be a village, I'm not going to say owned, or it would be more towards the village to use for parking. So you're saying that 3-level garage should handle your 109 units, correct?
Yes.
And that the 4th level would be a bonus level to us,
right,
to the village.
An example of something that's similar, we're redoing we're in the planning process right now in Tarrytown on the redevelopment of the YMCA. In that development, we're giving the village a 70-car municipal parking lot. And in that situation, what we're doing is what we propose is we're going to build a parking lot for the village. We're creating a commercial condo, and we're turning the parking garage over to the village where they'll get the income out of it. So and the way that we're funding the building of that garage is we're going to have a pilot there, and the pilot is essentially going to essentially reimburse us for the debt service cost of building the garage. So similarly, if the village wanted to have a parking level that's literally the village's, either we would allow them to build it, or more likely you'd want us to build it. And there's we could adjust for that in the pilot so that the village doesn't have to come out of pocket to pay for that. And then the village would get the income from that parking garage.
Okay. That was basically my 2 questions. The other trustees have covered quite a gauntlet of things, so I'll leave it to Rika.
Hey, thanks, Bob. So I'm not going to repeat everything everybody said. I'm going to build upon it. Let's see if everybody can hear me. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. So I think Omar kicked off the conversation, picked up by Manny. So I just wanted to bring in a slightly different angle. I have concerns about the parking. I find that even on the waterfront, with the building we have now, for those that have lived here long enough know that originally it was supposed to be a 4-story building built by a different developer altogether, who withdrew midstream. There was supposed to be parking included in that whole thing. Somehow the final product, while beautiful, is nothing like the beginning product. And I think Manny is been on the board long enough. I don't know if Manny was sort of having a taste of that in his mouth for a few years ago. So we have seen with private developers, I think it's a little different than what you're doing. So I think that just should be out there. Since this is being recorded, it's just context for concern. One of the things about having institutional knowledge, which I think is fantastic, is exactly to recognize that this is not the first time many people on this call and in this group have been through this. And we have to be cognizant that we should learn from past, and we share it with the developers too, by the way, so that you understand where some of the questions might be coming from. I have a concern that there is not enough parking for the size of this development and how it will be managed. I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm stating that I have a concern about it, because I stated in previous meetings that I don't think there's enough parking between handicap and everything else. But so to build on what's said, the one point I do want to ask you specifically about, Bill, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry, I sort of lost the picture right there. Okay, is when we went through the RFQ process, and there was more than just you, as was mentioned by Village Manager Dutori at the beginning of this with context on it, there was quite a bit of conversation about two topics. The first topic that I found really interesting is that the board, and I mean, you keep referring to the village, so I never know what the village is. The village is no human being. It's not a pronoun or a noun. There are many people that make decisions and many stakeholders, as Omar had pointed out. And who stakeholders are that have the input actually matters, and who is chosen to be going through this process with us. The more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. The question that came up during the RFQ process is that there are many ways to think about mixed-use buildings and buildings that like this and projects like this that is using actually public property. This is not owned by someone, it's the village's property. And that is that we could do this as a workforce development. We could do it as a seniors, we could do it as a 50 plus, we could do it in many ways. Maybe it's a little bit close to my heart right now that if I could wave a magic wand, and I voted for this going forward. I mean, I like this project. So again, I like many things about it, the way Omar and Manny have described and the way Bob did in our own ways. So I would give it all to, nurses and doctors and aides right now and make that the category for the building. So I was intrigued by the category discussion, but I've not heard that in you really went briefly through it. Could you explain, since this is also recorded and for public record, your point of view as how that enters a process, deciding what the category, if you will. I know in the city years ago and by the Broadway district, or at least what used to be called lovingly Hell's Kitchen, there were entire buildings that were for artists, for example. That was a category. So what kind of categories could we be looking at? What are our options in your opinion?
Well, so let's just clarify a couple of things. I had said this is a mixed income building, proposed as a mixed income building with income bands from 40% to 80%. That's about the incomes. That's not about sort of preference
Correct.
categories. I think you're asking me about preference categories. So preference categories, generally speaking, and this is, I'm going to make a general statement and then I will clarify. Generally speaking, you can't do preference in these developments. There are a couple of exceptions to that. Veterans housing is one. Seniors is obviously another. But generally speaking, you can't have preference in these developments. There are times that you can get some relief of that, but as a rule, you generally can't. I think what's interesting is that there have been some federal, and this is really from the federal government we're talking about. And the reason the federal government matters is that the tax credits that are part of the affordable housing tax credits have to follow two different federal guidelines, IRS guidelines and bond financing guidelines. And basically you have to meet not only the village's requirements and the county's requirements and the state's requirements, but also these federal requirements. So generally they don't allow preference. There are some exceptions. Veterans housing is currently one exception. Artist housing is an exception. There is a possibility that I absolutely could imagine coming out of this, that they may do something on the federal level or possibly at the state level, and there's a way to do it on the state level that would allow you to get around this federal level. It's too complicated to get into on this call, but I could imagine them doing something for healthcare workers because they're the new heroes and everyone gets that. I think that would be absolutely incredible if that happened. I mean, and if there were possible to say we're going to get preference on, 30% or 50%, whatever, the healthcare workers, I think, God, would that be absolutely wonderful. Currently, you couldn't do it, but maybe by the time this is over, we could.
Fair enough, and nothing wrong with looking at it. I was under the impression at some point in the RFQ that, in fact, the board can decide. For example, in response to continued conversations, and I think rather controversial, by the way, about the school system and housing as it relates. And by the way, not all housing, condos, co-ops, mixed everything, all housing, any increase in housing. So it's not anything specific except anything that involves having kids in the school system and increasing that number, that a board could say, for example, 50 plus, the odds of 50 plus people are a little bit lower than younger people. Not impossible, but it sort of changes the makeup. But you're telling me, based on where you're heading with this, that's not really available to us at this point in
You
time.
say 50 plus.
Now, the whole idea.
I'm sorry, are you saying 50 years old?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Okay. So just
Yeah,
as
I mean, I don't know how to qualify,
Yeah, I mean, as an example, age discrimination you can't do. There are two exceptions. One is 55 and over, another is 62 and over. You could do that, and then we're doing that in Tarrytown. That development is a 55
right.
and over
I should have been clear. I think I meant that. I think I meant the senior, the 55 plus, and that's what I actually meant, and not 50. But thank you. But that is a possibility, is what you're saying.
It's a possibility. The question is, would the state fund it? Would the county fund it? I mean,
Right.
that's the problem. Is sort of it's very complicated because we have to not only have an approvable project on the local level, but we have to have a development. To Omar's point before in his question, or I think it was Omar's question, at the end of the day, is this a financially viable project? And that's, an affordable development. It's all about the subsidies you're getting. So you have to not just get your approvals, you have to be able to have your financial partners willing to fund the project.
Right, because it's not privately funded. It's funded by public funding.
Yeah.
All up and down the line. Okay.
Right.
Again, this is a public meeting, and so I want some of the questions that have already been received. I want to sort of cover some basis. I really appreciate your insight into this. It's a little different than what we had discussed with some developers, but I do, or at least my understanding is different. And back to the coronavirus. So we probably are all sort of dancing on shifting sand, right? It's nobody on this call actually has an answer, only a bunch of guesses, because it's all very new to the government, to individuals, and it's also, I think, a very disheartening environment. But if most of the money comes from government in this scenario, you seem pretty optimistic that it will go forward. It seems to me, just from a balance point of view, when we're talking about billions, trillions, whatever the numbers are, at the state level in New York State, we don't print money at the state level. We can on the federal, I guess, but we don't on the state. And so my question comes back to every project that we're going to do go forward. I think a virus, and how do you include public? But I was more interested when asked that question to understand a little bit more about. Can everybody hear me? Just somebody raise their hand. You guys. Hello.
I lost you for a minute. I lost you for a little bit there.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Now I hear you. Good.
Okay, I must have had an internet thing. Thanks. Somebody just sent me a text that said that. So the coronavirus answer you had was about meetings and public meetings, and they may take a different format. Fair enough. The question I have is about funding that comes to you is mostly dependent on federal, state, county. You don't sound like you're expecting that to change, and yet for me, not only as a taxpayer, but a representative of the public, it seems to me that with the billions of dollars being spent, the place that will get cut, and my concern is exactly from grants, because they haven't started yet. They sound interesting, as you said, to the state. The reason I get concerned about it is we can't, as Manny had said, we can't go down the path a bit and then be told sorry. I mean, you wouldn't be happy about that without a question, but we would be stuck with that, which is a different way to look at it. So you're relatively optimistic that all these grants will still be available when we start looking at how much money the state has had to spend on this virus in about a 10-week period or 12-week period that we're going through, probably longer.
So I have to obviously agree with you that we're on shifting sand. Historically, when there is a recession, the government at every level is trying to promote economic development and also trying to help those who are suffering most. In New York State, we have a governor who's very pro affordable housing. He's put more money to affordable housing than any predecessor, including his father. Westchester County has been very pro development, very pro affordable housing, more proactive than any county in the state. I don't know the answer to your question. My sense from history is that, limited history, but I've been doing this for 30 years, that Westchester County probably will be there. That said, I will tell you that I know that New York State HCR, it was last week, took all the projects that were not already greenlit and said we're putting them on hold until we see where this all ends up. So I know they did that. They happened to exempt our Tarrytown project, so I think that'll actually go forward. And I think eventually all the projects that they're putting on hold will happen. I think we're at a moment in time where there's a lot of uncertainty, but this will end, and the certainty will get we'll get more clarity then. I do think it's not unlikely that this will not be a straight line. We're going to start the process. We're going to do the outreach. We're going to see what happens. It's certainly possible that it will be not a straight line to get to the finish line with funding. It's the state and county historically have really liked developments that have that are public-private partnerships. I think they prefer funding those to developments that are strictly a private developer coming up with a piece of land, proposing it, going through the battles of getting it approved, and having a private development. These public-private partnerships they like a lot.
Yeah, I get that. Well, those were my questions, Bill. I very much appreciate, and I also always like the fact that you originally lived in Ossining. It's nice to have somebody who knows our community from inside out come in. I think that's terrific. So thank you for your time. I'm done. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. My last one would only be, I'm trying to see if anybody's raising their hand. My last one is only going to be,
I do.
What's our next steps from this?
Bill, you can answer her question about next steps, or I don't know, somebody can. I can't, but then I have more questions.
Oh, well, maybe you should ask. Yeah, go ahead, Omar. Ask your final questions.
Fantastic. Final questions. There are 3. Of the first, there is, and I will. I want to be as generous as possible, but also as straightforward as possible. There is a graveyard of developers that is strewn across the DPW site. If you go back to 2006, there's records of folks trying to develop on that land, and not because of the environment, because of the brownfield cleanup necessary, not because of one specific thing, but for a myriad reasons. It hasn't happened. There was a creamery, an ice cream manufacturer that was going to go there in 2015 that pulled out. There was housing, all sorts of stuff. So my question is, given this context that it's not an easy piece of land, and it's a place, a community that also is going to be rigorous in the way that it asks questions about how to move forward, what gives you the confidence to feel like, yes, we are the people that are able to move this project forward?
Good question. I like it. I think it's a good project that has, I think that the process will demonstrate that this is the right use for the property and there are the right funding programs to make it happen. I think the Brownfield Cleanup program is something that really works well for a building like this that I'm sure for some of the development graveyard you're talking about didn't exist back then. I think that we're going to figure out very early on in the process if we're going to be able to get through the Con Ed DEC process. I think we're going to figure out very early on if we're going to have HCR in Westchester County in this development. And I think, those are some very important things that if they happen, the odds of our success, I think, are good. If we don't propose a development that people get excited about, we're not going to get the municipal approvals that we need. So I think, we've done our best to come up with a development that is going to excite people. I will tell you that one of the things that brings me great joy in what I do is to go by developments, whether it's Stone Creek next to Club Fit and Briarcliff that we did 30 years ago, or the Cupola Building at Reader's Digest, or Hollowbrook Golf Club on an incredibly complicated site up in Cortland, town of Cortland, and I could name literally 25 other developments. Most developments we've done, I think to myself, if we hadn't done them, they would have not gotten done that way. And I'm very proud of that. And I think that we try to do developments that we're going to be proud of. I mean, the Tarrytown Y, we're doing that site. It has no zoning. We have to get complete zoning for that site, but we're doing it because we came up with a plan that people are really excited about. We met with Merchants Group, who's a very powerful stakeholder, and basically they had some great ideas. We changed our plan completely as a result of those conversations. We're open to that, and at the same time, as you can tell from my responses, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If you're asking me if I can do office, and I'm going to tell you right now I can't, because I don't want to go down a road and ultimately lead people to believe something that at the end of the day they're just going to be pissed off because I can't actually do it. So I think part of what has made it successful is that I'll be very honest, and people will trust my honesty pretty quickly, and people will go see other things we've done in other communities. And I think am I sure we're going to be successful? No. Do I think the odds are that we'll be successful where maybe others haven't been? I think so. And I think part of it is that I think the timing is right. You're in the process of going through or about to go through your comprehensive plan. I think what we're doing here is going to fit in with your comprehensive plan. This is a site that is contaminated, needs to be cleaned up. We're going to do that. There's going to be a huge awareness of the need to support those most in need or providing mixed income housing. I just think we're doing a lot of things that people are going to like. And I think at the end of the day, people are going to come out to support this development more than they're going to come out to oppose it. And I think the greenway, the extension of that greenway, which will create a connection from the water up to the village, is going to be a very positive thing. I mean, there's just so much going for this development that, again, I'm not positive we're going to be successful, but I think we're going to give ourselves a very good chance to be successful with your help.
Thank you. Number 2 of 3 is about climate change. So Cornell partnered with the village in order to study the effects of climate change at the waterfront and showed some pretty scary results. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about how that has implications for your project.
Well, I guess there are 2 basic things. From our building, our finished product will be a very green building that will sort of embrace that. But I think probably more important is that the building, a lot of the property, and not a lot, some of the property is in a floodplain, and there's the current flood maps and the proposed flood maps. And I think it would be out of our mind to not be designing the building for the proposed flood maps, which is really directly addressing your question. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you. And my last question. So the challenge with projects of this kind, developing housing of nearly any kind, nearly anywhere in this country, but particularly large projects like this, is that the costs of the project are concentrated and the benefits are dispersed. So the kinds of folks who will come out in favor of this project because they might live there in the future, or because they would benefit from walking through a much more beautiful path from the waterfront to Main Street, may not even know that they are the people who would benefit from those things because it doesn't exist yet, right? Whereas the people who have kids in school now, who are driving on roads now, who are paying taxes now, are feeling that much more. But you mentioned something earlier that I think is worth repeating, which is that we're going through the comprehensive plan. And that is a really unique opportunity where the village is really intentionally going into the community to get their thoughts about what the future of the village should look like. Specifically not saying what should the budget be for next year or what should the priorities be for next quarter, but over the course of the next decade. Now, when it comes to a project like this, being able to have a long-term perspective is critical. So that preamble having been said, my question is about the process for public engagement. Have you ever worked with a third party to facilitate public engagement? If you haven't, would you be open to? And the reason that I ask is this, not because I don't trust your facilitation experience or skills, but if I ask a air conditioner salesman whether I need an air conditioner, he's gonna say yes. And so if I ask a developer whether we should build, you're gonna say yes. And that makes sense because it's your job. And so it also makes sense to have a third party facilitate particularly early conversations so that it's not seen as being led by the person who has such an interest in the result. All of that has a question buried in there. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that I've struggled in the past to have a community, because you're really talking about here, the village board, really want to take the bull by the horns in the way you're describing, because ultimately you would want me to hire the third party, you would want to hire the third party. And, you know, frankly, when I did the Hollowbrook Golf Club that I mentioned before, you know, that was a site that was zoned for 145 single family homes on a 150-acre site. And we had proposed to the town to do something sort of similar to what you're describing. And at the end of the day, we ended up doing this concept committee process, which was 8 meetings over 9 weeks that ended with a 3 or 4 page memo of a preferred plan. And then we began the approval process. And 3 years later, they approved the concept committee plan that was the result of that 9-week process was literally the exact plan that got built after an entire environmental review process. In that case, we did not have an outside facilitator because that wasn't something the town was going to do. We did it ourselves, but we had suggested to the supervisor in that case that she give us 2 members of the planning board, 2 members of the village board, the town engineer, the town planner, and then we reached out and found all the stakeholders who would be interested, and we had a series of meetings. I'm open to all of it. At the end of the day, I think the key is to get the input and to build a rapport with people and answer their questions. And essentially, in the process I just described, you know, after the first couple of meetings, you know, we'd be asked a lot of things that our professionals would come back and present. The town planner was there, engineer, members of the public, and you know, there was a large back and forth. And over the course of these 8 meetings, we got a lot of questions answered. We built a lot of trust about what we were doing. And I think that's why these processes are good. You know, whether they're facilitated or not, I don't think it's so much the issue. I think more the issue is being willing to not just have it be lip service, but being genuinely interested in having a dialogue that's more than 1 meeting.
Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Sorry, I had my mute. Anybody else before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, seeing no hands. Bill, really a big thank you. We've been talking for about an hour. I'm sorry, did I miss somebody?
Process and next steps?
I did ask for, I was going to say that, but yeah, well, it's been about an hour, and I don't know if I just don't know if it's Bill or if it's Karen or somebody else to answer that question.
So the
I
next
did want to
step,
thank Bill though first.
the next step would be bringing a resolution to next week's meeting to allow us to enter an agreement with Bill to proceed in the development of the project.
I do have a quick question in that regards to Karen and probably Stuart. If that's the case, if we do agree to bring that into a resolution for next week, obviously, I would like to see the resolution before, you know, way before that. I would like to make sure, you know, as we always try to do better, and I like to learn from my mistakes in the past. So I would like to make sure that we all have a chance to actually review this document and actually see whatever that resolution and the language is, because we had in the past we had agreed to something, and then I ended up realizing that it was not what we thought it was. And I don't want to get caught in the middle of that again. So I want to make sure, and I want to triple check myself and with whatever agreement we ended up going for. So if you can help me out that with Stuart, what will be in that one? Will we have an opportunity to review it obviously before? And how does that work with Bill at that end? So if you can help me out with that one, Stuart, please.
I'll have a resolution for you folks to review.
Manny, are you asking that we not do it for next week, but the following, so there's more time to look at it? Or what exactly? I didn't understand the question, to be honest with you.
So pretty much, in the past, in a particular project where we actually extended a resolution, as a part of the resolution, we extended our special permit. My understanding was different than what the resolution was. And I think we all thought that was not the case. So I want to make sure that when I read this document, and I encourage all of us to read this document, whatever will come up, make sure that what we intend to be in regards to this resolution. Sorry, Karen.
No, I just want to answer. I know which resolution you're talking of. This resolution would basically encapsulate the conversations we've just had and the criteria that we've talked about and things that Bill's outlined in his emails to you and has discussed in his presentations about how we would proceed. So again, it would be allowing this to then move forward on all the points we've just discussed, the public engagement, the identification of funding sources, those things going forward. Stuart, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or if Bill, you want to expand on that too.
Well, the one thing I would say is that this is a resolution, it's not the agreement. This is just a resolution
Exactly.
to allow the village to have an agreement. I think, Manuel, what you're really are going to be most curious about, I think, is the agreement, which you're going to have plenty of time to look at.
That one too, yes, of course.
So that I just wanted to make that distinction, because this is not, to Bill's point, this is not the agreement.
No, I understand that, but again, anyway, I'm not going to go into that, to the other portion.
Yeah.
But
I think this is a very different type of framework, but I think that we can successfully, I know that Stuart's very close to this, and we understand what the charge is. So I think that if Stuart's time permits, we can get that to you in advance. I don't want to promise for Stuart, though.
No, and I think
in advance.
And I think to maybe, and again, that will be more like a question to the board. If I'm even to Stuart, to put a resolution together for next week, is that can we wait another 2 weeks for something like this? I don't want to rush things. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. We all have discussions. We all have the same understanding. So that will be a question for the rest of the board, I guess, if you guys feel comfortable having a resolution for next week.
I personally think if Stuart could get us something to look at and we could look at it, we still have the option to table it for 2 weeks. We don't have to exactly vote on it. We could table it if we're not comfortable.
That is correct.
Yeah, I agree. I will only I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut somebody off.
No, that's okay. This is, how it is these days through these phones and computers, but it's okay. I just think if we could have something in our hands to look at, and, God knows we don't have time to look at things now. We could look at it if we're not comfortable or we want another week or two to vote on it. We have that option.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I will only let you know that beginning tomorrow, I have a holiday that I don't work on, which is, I thank everyone again for the effort. I'm not the only one, but others, and we then have Easter, etc. So we're in the middle of a holiday. We're also in the middle of of a pandemic that while for some of us means we're home a lot and have time, for others it's a very sad and really sort of difficult time. And I would say that's the same case for everybody in our community. And I don't want to be perceived as a member who has been elected to represent the public. And I've said this before, I don't want there to be any perception that we're rushing anything through during something that is so stressful for members of the public. Frankly, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a little disappointed there's not more people listening in on this, based on maybe people will view it, you know, in a recorded fashion. Housing, again, of any type is always a controversial issue. It doesn't matter what type of housing, and I've lived here for over 25 years. It's always been controversial, no matter when, what, or where. I understand, Manny, where you're going with it, but to Bob's point, we can look at something, and if we want to table it, we will table it. If it doesn't feel right, that's as good of reason to table something as having a whole bunch of stated reasons. That's a prerogative of the vote. I appreciate, Stuart, by the way, of you getting this to us quickly. I'm just going to say up front so that I set expectations. I do not plan to be responding, certainly not during this holiday. So just putting it out there. Do we want a resolution? Can I just have somebody put their hands up so I can look and say yes, you know, say yes, or?
I say yes.
I'm hearing, okay. Omar?
I'm fine with that.
Manny?
I'm okay with that. Sure.
So am I. Okay. We're not necessarily voting. We just need to know that the board is leaning in one direction or another, at least a majority vote. So I guess Stuart will be getting resolution.
Yes.
Okay. I think
Thank-
Victoria will probably come back on at some point. And I guess, manager, do we want to go on with the agenda?
Yes, thank you, Bill, for your presentation.
Sure. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you.
Right. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
So next up, we wanted to, in September, we talked about the Thm Removal System that's meant to keep our water running, moving in our water tanks. This is considered essential work that needs to be done. It went out to bid, it needed to be rebid, but tonight we will have our Superintendent of Water, Andy Teese, and our Treasurer and Deputy Treasurer, Tom Warren and Dale Brennan, talk about this. With that, I will turn it over to them.
I guess I'll start. Thank you. I have Dan Ciarcia with us tonight, who is helping manage the construction management of this project. As Rika said, the silver lining was we hired Dan kind of right before the first bid went out. The first bid was not successful because there were some mistakes, and they were like, Dan found them kind of in he was hired in the 11th hour, and there were some mistakes by the consulting engineer, which would have created some change orders. So, and the way the bid went down, it was discussed with Corporation Counsel that we should rebid the project, which I'm glad we did. And we did rebid this project, which was a March 20th bid. And the lowest bidder, which was the only bidder, was it's going to be managed by a local company, but the bid came in at $1,158,000 by Foremost Development Contracting. Basically, they're an electrical company, because most of this work is electrical work with pumping and mixing. We wanted to put a contingency in there. Usually we put, 10%. Talked to Tom. We talked about putting 8%, because by bringing CRC Engineering, he found a lot of the mistakes in the drawings. And the second round, when we went to rebid this project with the state, it was included. Everything was was done correctly. And it was mistakes like step-up transformers, that kind of stuff, hand railings, disconnect switches, and an average contractor would have hit us up with a lot of change orders. So it was a blessing in disguise to go out to bid for the second time. Dan, did you want to talk about it a little bit? Because you put a lot of energy into this. You there, Dan?
There I go. Just had to unmute myself. No, I guess the only other thing just want to make everybody aware of was through the whole process, the first bid and the second bid, there were really only two bidders who provided, who bid on the project. And the one bidder was sort of unusual because it's actually the equipment supplier who's out of state. But in the end, the bidder foremost is, I guess, really doesn't have a choice. Not only do we have to acquire the equipment from them, they bring their own crews in to the actual installation of the aerators and blowers that'll go into the tanks. So we've had the bid out on the street twice already, and the characters or the bidders are really, I'd say, narrowed down to two interested parties. And we're much more comfortable with this bid because we actually have a local contractor involved with this that both Andy and I are familiar with. And we've had good success working with that individual.
And just as far as the need, it's self-explanatory. We're on a 250,000 gallon tank up at Richard Wishney Park. The 4 million gallon tank is out of service right now. It's been out of service for the last year and a half. So it's very important to get that tank back into service. So that's the focus of it, to put the tank back into service, to put the mixers in there, to put the exhaust systems in. Not only does it mix the water so that the chlorine dissipates and it mixes into the system so you don't have changes in water quality, but you now need to remove the gases out of those tanks. So that system would be in the Torbank tank too, and then the Lakeville tank just has a mixer without the exhaust. I guess, Tom, you could talk about the funding.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. We had developed a project budget of $1.3 million, which was the sum of the amount of the bid, plus the contingency that Andy had mentioned, and also the money for the construction manager, $1.3 million. We had included in our 2020 capital plan that this would be bonded. Today I received the bond resolution from bond counsel, that will be on the agenda for next week. At $1.3 million for 20 years, the debt service, which would be paid for entirely out of the water fund, is $84,500 a year approximately. And also I had submitted a resolution to actually establish the capital project on our accounting records for the $1.3 million. So in addition to those two resolutions, I think the third action item next week will be the resolution to award the bid contract and authorize the manager to sign the contract.
Thanks. Is there any other staff that wants to give us any insights on this before I just make sure that see if any of the trustees have any questions or comments before we move forward? Okay, then Andy, I just, because we've talked so much about water this year, I want to clarify that this project was actually already in the works for quite some time and is not related to the recent taste and odor concerns that we've had with the water. Actually, the problem that arose that we're addressing now came about because of the incredible improvements that we made to the system as a result of the demand management grant that we got a couple of years ago. Now the system is so tight and so efficient and so optimized that we're creating movement in the water so that the system can be fully functional. Is that an accurate description? You want to clarify?
That's a great point. Yeah, I've talked about it years ago, but by us finding the 400,000 gallon day per leak with the water demand project years ago, it caused us to really tighten the system up. And when we tighten the system up like that, the water stays in the tanks longer, which is good. But then the downside is because it's in contact with the chlorine longer, you get the disinfection byproducts. So that's why, once we found the leaks and we had a high organic year where we had algae and organics, and the chlorine came in contact with it, we saw our numbers start to go up. We never went out of compliance during that time period, but the immediate change was to switch over to the smaller tank so that we use the water faster. We weren't going to open fire hydrants and waste water. I mean, that would have moved the water too. That's essentially what a leak was. But it's, we should do a paper on this. It was really good. I didn't expect to have, to save 400,000 gallons a day a year it's a lot of money, especially finished water. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
So if we were to look at this big picture, and I'm not the finance person, I'm not the water person, so I don't have the skill set to do it. But the cost that we are laying out now for this capital project is a one-time cost that is offset by the annual benefits that we now have from having tightened up our system so that we're no longer wasting water. So
right.
we're going in the right direction on all fronts.
Well, yeah, I mean, even the raw water cost, without doing the finished water cost, but the raw water cost, every million gallons is $2,000. So if we're saving close to 500,000 gallons a day, that adds up over a year, so it's big savings. There are some electrical costs, but it's not high horsepower equipment, so it's not going to be a lot.
Great. Well, thanks so much. It sounds like we'll have some paperwork to look at next week, so this can get underway. Thank you, and thank you, Dan, for helping us make sure that this project goes off as smoothly as possible.
Great.
Anything else from staff before we move on? All right. Thanks. Karen, what's next? You're muted, Karen. Woo-hoo.
How could I forget that? As you all know, we are in unprecedented times, as we hear often. We have been working, I should say, Dale and Tom and the department heads from the beginning have been anticipating a lot of things that we need to do as a village to respond in real time to the situation that we're in. Of course, fiscal responsibility is of extreme importance, right next to just ensuring that our employees are safe and that we're keeping our communities as healthy as possible. We've done a tremendous amount of work collectively, and Dale and Tom have done a really thorough analysis of budget year to date, although there's still a lot of things, a lot of moving parts. So I'm going to turn this over to them for a preliminary report on where we are in terms of budget in reaction to COVID-19, and this will be part of a regular touch base presentations from them during the course of this situation. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our treasurer and deputy treasurer. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. As Karen mentioned, there's a lot to focus on and to consider. There's the revenue side of the budget and the potential for a serious reduction in revenues. We've been trying to figure out what those numbers would be. It seems to be anybody's guess. When you talk about our big revenues being sales tax, mortgage tax, property tax revenues, and departmental income, and I'll also throw in interest earnings because that has certainly been affected by the banks significantly reducing the percentage that they're paying on our deposits. We're trying to figure out what that revenue shortfall could potentially be for 2020. Initially, when I started throwing numbers together, I was looking at a possible 20% shortfall in sales tax revenues. Dale had actually attended a conference call with the county this afternoon, and they provided some, I guess, insight from their perspective as to what the revenue shortfall might be for that, as well as for the mortgage tax. So, Dale, if you'd like to jump in and talk about that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, great, absolutely. And it was definitely a very informative phone call. And the news was much better than I anticipated, because in working with the numbers, I was looking at doing a 25% sales tax reduction for all 4 quarters across the board. But in this phone call, they basically say the first quarter is going to mirror what we received for the 4th quarter of 2019, which, if that is the case, then that already reaches 30% of our budget amount for 2020. The 2nd quarter, they're looking at a 20% reduction in sales tax revenue. 3rd quarter, they're looking at a 15% reduction. And 4th quarter, they're looking at a 10% reduction. Now, the interesting thing with this is when I did the numbers and brought them out with those reductions, because we were very conservative in our budgeting and not taking that full 1% additional amount for our 2020 budget, we basically will come close to what we had already budgeted for 2020. So fingers crossed. I mean, it's still a best guesstimate, but I think we're going to be pretty close.
That's good news.
And mortgage tax, Dale?
Mortgage tax, they were saying a 10% reduction, which for the village would equal a reduction of 18,000, pretty much 18,000 in revenue. But I have to say, I mean, right now, we've gotten a lot of final readings in, so people are still moving around at this point. Whether that slows down, it remains to be seen.
And that's a good sign for anybody looking to sell their house in 2020.
Well, I don't imagine there's a lot of people going to open houses these days. I imagine that the closings that we're seeing happen were already well underway and paperwork had been filed from over a month ago. So, you know, let me just make sure I have for a little bit more context as you're giving us these numbers, Dale. Tom mentioned that our main sources of revenue that we're concerned about seeing a reduction on were sales tax, mortgage tax, property tax, and income earnings. And we heard that the sales tax is not going to be a big hit for us from what we budgeted, which is great news. The mortgage tax remains to be seen. I have a feeling that 10% reduction that we just saw is going to keep going down because nobody's house hunting at the moment, unless somebody's truly doing everything online, which isn't usually how people buy houses, but who knows? It's a new world. So how much of our revenue is attributed to sales tax? How much is attributed to mortgage tax? And then I'll let you continue giving us the rest of the rosy-ish or not rosy-ish picture ahead.
Well, another point of we were talking about was also interest earnings, which I'd spoken with one of our banks today, who is giving us actually a pretty incredible rate, and they're not changing it, anytime soon, according to them, and actually said, if you want to move more money over, bring it on over. But so I think on interest earnings, we hopefully will not take too big of a hit on the revenues. But I can do a quick calculation for how much of these items are part of our budget.
Thanks, Dale.
Sure.
Yeah, we had about $4.56 million for sales tax in the 2020 budget. and that looks like it. And looks like it might be about maybe 12% of the budget. Property taxes is about 60%. That's one that I'm concerned about as we're closing our accounting records for 2020. One of the calculations that needs to be done is the amount of deferred property tax revenues, and that's based on the collection of property taxes in the first 60 days of the new year, which would be 2020, January and February. And it's disappointing that as great as 2019 has been economically, it was actually about a $200,000 shortfall in revenues that we're going to have to recognize for 2019. Of course, the potential is that we'll collect that revenue in a future year, especially as the properties taxes are paid, or if the properties go to auction. But with things as difficult as they are in 2020, our first half tax collection was normal. It remains to be seen what the tax installment collection rate will be in July. So that's the thing to prepare for. If people don't pay their property taxes, there's likely to be a substantial amount of increased deferred taxes at the end of 2020, which would impact the financial statements negatively. If we're even looking at 5% uncollectability, that's over $1 million. So, we're just gonna have to wait and see, how the tax collections are in July compared to January and possibly July last year to see what the impact might be. Is there any other questions on the revenues before we talk about the expense side of the budget?
I'm going to wait. It's Rika. Thanks, Tom and Dale. I'm going to wait till you're done because I'm taking notes on this. I have a bunch of questions, but I'd rather that you just finish the full presentation.
Tom, I want to understand something that you said. You said as good a year as 2019 was, we still had a $200,000 revenue shortfall that we would have anticipated making up at the beginning of 2020. Is that, could you clarify what that meant? And how unusual is that? What does that say to us for this year?
With property taxes, it's generally you start the year by recognizing the entire tax levy, and then at the end of the year, generally accepted accounting principles requires us to calculate the amount of current year property taxes that's not collected during the current year and the following 60 days into the new year, and record that as deferred revenues, which, that means that you reduce the amount of property tax revenues for the year, so therefore you have a shortfall. We'll eventually collect that money. It'll be collected in a future year, and when it is collected in a future year, it actually, from an accounting perspective, becomes recognized as revenues in that future year. And that's just because of the generally accepted accounting principles that require you to do this 60-day calculation in the following year and adjust the current year revenues. And, it's plus and minus. There's years that we actually show more revenues than was actually levied because we're collecting prior year taxes. And 2019 just happened to be one of those years that we had an increase in the unpaid taxes, which negatively affects the village's finances for 2019.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and on the expense side of the budget, we've been looking at all the possible different options. Certainly, we're looking at unfilled positions and evaluating, how long those positions might remain unfilled. As the board knows, we were going to establish a new department for the youth.
The Youth Bureau.
Right, the Youth Bureau for 2020. And, I think we had thought that this would start in the second quarter of 2020. And now it's, seems to be pushed off as well. And I'm not sure right now, I'm looking at my notes to see if we had any other unfilled positions at this time.
We have one position in building that hasn't been filled, as well as a first-year officer that probably will not be filled in talking with Kevin at this point until January. And then we had an extra line item in the budget for potential additional capacity. So that became a piece to reduce expenses that we could do.
And also, because the recreation programs aren't being run at this time, we certainly have the savings to offset the loss of the revenues there. And if the summer camp programs aren't up and running, the savings on the expense side of the budget in terms of camp counselors and the other contractual expenses would help to offset the loss in the recreation department revenues in that regard. And, in our conference call yesterday with the department heads, we were talking about the potential increased expenses. If, for instance, like down in New York City, there's a substantial increase in police overtime because of the number of officers that are out on sick leave. So that's something to monitor here at the village, as well as the potential for increased overtime or outside contractor expenses for garbage collection in the village. I think Paul is monitoring that as well. And we are also talking about looking at 2020 capital projects and determining whether or not any of those should be deferred at that time. At this time, the 2020 budget included a substantial amount of 2019 surplus fund balance that was used to establish a funding for many of the vehicles that were in the budget. And also we had designated 2019 surplus fund balance to pay for the street paving project in 2020. And so in addition to evaluating whether or not any of these projects should be deferred and pushed off to a future time in order to not spend the money, you could also look at other financial options. For instance, we could instead issue serial bonds to help pay for the street paving capital project instead of using the $450,000, I think, that we had included in the 2020 budget from 2019 fund balance to pay for that project. And being early in the year, there's certainly sufficient time to ask bond counsel for a bond resolution and to allow the referendum period and the estoppel period to take place before that project gets underway.
Sounds like Rita's ready to ask a question. Was
that I'm waiting. No,
I just wanted to, Tom, was that everything you had in the expense side for us to consider at this time?
I'm looking at my notes, and I think that that's pretty much all that we had talked about and that we've been thinking about at this time.
Okay, Rika.
Yeah, I mean, I think thank you both, and I'm sure it's been a crazy time. It's something that I've spent a lot of time on, and I took a deep dive into the budget. I went online a few days ago just to sort of wrap my head around what we all agreed to and all that. Also taking into account a number of municipalities, including the town, have sort of put a stopgap and said no spending until further notice, until we figure out where things are, rather than doing the analysis to then figure out what to do. I mean, there are a number of different approaches, and it's the approach that I'm interested in. So Dale, these numbers look really conservative to me, what the county is expecting. And I guess they use January and February numbers because most of the coronavirus shutdown, I may have it off by a day or two, but I think it was around March 13th or so that most of this stuff happened, more or less, because it depends on who you were and what you were, and again, shifting sands. So people understood things differently, etc. So they're looking, I don't know how far back they look. I don't know if they look at the last recession that we had to get a more realistic picture, but it seems to me that it's surprisingly conservative. And if they're wrong, they'll make adjustments. But if they're wrong, it'll be expensive for us for them to be wrong if we go that way. It seems to me that we should be very proactively looking at budgets. I'm not implying that you're not, but if I were to do budgets, and I do budgets actually in a different life, so I would be looking at a 20%, 33%, and 50% reduction in revenues beginning after the first quarter, which we just ended. Reason is we're still getting inertia from last year, as was just described, and I won't go through the whole conversation. It is eyes wide open when you look at all your neighbors living everywhere here. Every household has lost some income. Virtually every household has lost income. So it is more than a 10% loss. I appreciate the county doing the analysis so quickly. Really, who am I to say that they're wrong? But it seems highly unlikely to me, given the loss of jobs. And what the state is doing, and the government is doing, is coming up with different machinations to make payrolls. But payrolls are not economic drivers. Payrolls are survival tactics to keep people really off of, to be able to pay things minimally. They're not maximally paying anything. They're not economic drivers. They're not economic engines. They're really, people are able to pay their rent right now based on what they have saved for the past number of years. But as we know, Americans, on the average, in a community like ours, most likely, don't have a whole lot of savings to pay for things. That's just statistically known about Americans. This is not a surprise. So I'm sort of taken aback by the low percentages. I've been modeling where I work at 20, a third, and 50%, figuring if I'm too conservative, good for me, because there isn't anybody that can make up the shortfall if I'm wrong, right? Yes, government can just increase taxes, but increase taxes for whom? People that already are suffering because of this pandemic, and it's going on for at least another 4 to 8 weeks, I think, right? So the schools are closed till the end of April, so we've got quite a ways to go. And when businesses open up, many of them are going to see continued losses. So our small business environment is hurting. I understand the accounting on the community center, the revenues, the expenses on an accounting sheet, but it also means that a whole lot of our local people that get employed by the community center and the camp are not going to have employment, depending on when we open. So it isn't, to me, just a balance sheet. For me, I think that you guys should be modeling, and not waiting, but modeling much deeper numbers than what the county is expressing.
I actually, when I did the analysis, I had a 25% reduction for across the board for every quarter for sales tax, which basically brought us to minus 587,447 in revenue in comparison with what we budgeted. So, you know, that was my methodology going in.
Right.
to use that number. And that's the number that stays. But after that meeting this afternoon, it's kind of like, all right, maybe, they would know better, maybe not.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't think anybody knows. So
Right, I would rather
absolutely
look at
right.
different models than sit here and figure out what the right model is so that we are aware. My modeling for where I work is that you figure out 1 percentage point and what that equals so that you know what 1 percentage point is between expenses and revenues, and without looking at other vehicles that you could then do, like bonds and all that. Those are options, those are tools.
Right.
This is pretty straightforward. Half the population is not earning an income, not earning less, not earning an income. If you don't want to do 50%, because that seems just draconian, certainly I like your 25% better, and then figure out a percentage point. So when we have conversations, we're not all spinning around, well, the last webinar I went to said, we only meet once a week, but rather tell me what 1 percentage point means so that I know that if it's 18% or 20, I can do this in my head. And it makes it easier to figure that out. Secondly, I assume you went across everything, all the fees that we collect. I mean, it is reasonable to assume that when folks lose income, except for the top 1%, and I appreciate it, but let's talk about the other 99%, that it creates not only a psychological burden of fear, meaning that all these non-for-profits, all of the houses of worship, all those people will not be getting revenues and therefore will continue. It's a recessionary cycle, right? And so I think being more conservative has lots of reasons in our community. We have no economic engine. We have two large employers. One is a non-for-profit and one is a metals company, which is doing actually quite well. So, and many non-for-profits are employers here who are suffering even at a greater proportion, just like small businesses, than corporations that the other part of Westchester has, whether it's Morgan Stanley, IBM, Regeneron, blah, blah, blah. They have some economic engines, the cities have them. So I think we need to be very conservative. I like your idea a lot better, and across everything. In proportion to our collection, right? So if you collect 60% for something, you have to sort of prorate it. And you have to assume that we will collect even fewer fees for things. I mean, people, they don't add up to a lot. It's $10 for this and $25 for that. But you've got to believe that that's going to suffer even in a greater, I would pay my mortgage and my rent before I pay for the dog license, right? I mean, so I think you do have to count, and I think this has to be done relatively quickly. I mean, there must be 100 webinars right now going on. But we need to have these answers, which you're already halfway there from what I'm hearing. Looking at capital projects, I think needs to be done on the next meeting on which ones we should go forward, which one we should postpone. And frankly, we should be looking, I would like to reopen, and I don't know if my colleagues on the call would agree or disagree, but I'm recommending that we open up the entire budget, which was done at the peak of a boom of 10 years. Those decisions were made with an understanding that people were doing, not all people, but for the most part, the economy was in a boom, and it's now, everything has just changed in a matter of a month. And if I'm wrong, then we can always open up the purse strings. That's really easy to do. But if I'm right, we are going to do great damage in 2021, because while we look at budgets year to year, and I've said this before, we should always be looking at 3-year budgets. We have 1 year affects the next, as was just presented earlier. So I really would like us to think about not only slowing down expenses, but understanding that we want to reopen the budget and start looking at the line items again, which we don't usually do. We don't have a reason to. And I would also like to not spend money right now unless something can be proven that is absolutely essential and makes financial sense and doesn't cause a financial burden in the future. As the water project was just presented, I also think there are going to be a couple of things. I think the Youth Bureau, for me personally, not speaking for the board, the Youth Bureau might be a place we might need to do more quickly, because I think the isolation and people needing to find jobs as soon as the job market opens again really requires us to have a place for our young people to go to. So I'm not saying everything should be cut. I am saying everything should be revisited with a point of view of, do we really need to do this now, or do we need to save the money? And I did look at the budget, but this meeting wasn't for us to do it, but I do want to call a meeting, either a special session or do it as quickly as possible to start looking at that before we spend another penny. And I'm going to let the rest of the folks talk about, I don't know enough about the serial bonds. Tom, I'm not going to ask you any questions. I'm just going to look that up myself. I don't need to waste everybody's time with understanding serial bonds now. I can just do that separately and understand why that could be a great tool. So I'm sorry, I'm not hesitating. I'm trying to just, I have a page and a half of notes here. I don't know if we're doing it now, but we are talking about, I think it's later, about delaying some things or putting things on payment plans. So the issue of time, Tom, and what it does to revenues would be very interesting as we talk about that. And the thing I had asked for in the last meeting was a separate budget, and I haven't seen it yet. What the virus has cost the village, what public funding has, as was mentioned. So I'd like to see an expense sheet that talks specifically about the incremental cost to our budget, about what this coronavirus has cost us, separate and above. Are we paying more sick leave than we would have normally done? Will we pay more going forward? If anybody, I had a staff member who passed away, and it's probably why my voice is a little shaky, about an hour before I got on the phone. It's really, really tough, but it also opened up conversations that I don't know very much about. Life insurance policies we didn't think were going to be spent, like all sorts of stuff that is very related, that will cost more money, that was never predicted. Why would anybody predict in the budget? So I'd like to see the expenses, whether it's $10, $10,000, that have been used, and I'm sure rightfully so, by the way, rightfully so, but still that this is costing us that we could never have predicted, but need to think about. Not so much questions, because we were told for this agenda, it's going to be the beginning of a conversation, but I did want to set a plan that coming out of this, I really would like to find with my colleagues a way to say that no money should be spent and no one should be hired, which is an expense, without the board understanding what that cost looks like, because I'd like the budgets reopened line item by line item. That's sort of my commentary. And others can speak.
Are there any other trustees that would like to ask questions or make comments about the budget and where we are in our financial standing?
I'll jump in.
Hey, Omar.
Thank you to the staff who presented, Tom, Dale, others. So what would be most helpful for me is, in the same way that Victoria, you're giving updates to the village about what our status is for the virus, how many folks are currently positive, what the implications are, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't participate as a participant in the budget conversations last year, so I have the context from being an observer, but from being an observer, seeing that there's a lot of detail that goes into so many of these budgets, and I don't know how logistically realistic it would be to go into essentially reapproving every line item before moving forward. I would probably prioritize either the highest ticket items or the ones that seem like they are the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to what we would reduce in terms of expenses. What you mentioned, personnel, but there may be other things as well, capital projects, whatever else. That is probably the direction that I would go, wanting to balance what we can do quickly versus what is going to be the biggest impact. Overall, what I want to do is to demystify the process, because data is important, and I think that the numbers that you all shared are helpful in understanding where we are. And I think doing that regularly, saying whether it's, I don't think we have to do it every week, but on a regular cadence, where we are and what we need to do. And once we do that, that to me would make me feel more comfortable. And then B, noting what are all of these changes that we're making, so that in the fall, as we go into budget season, that's where it's really going to have a huge implication, what it is that we're doing for next year, because that is where we are really going to get into the nitty gritty.
Okay, thanks. I don't think that there's a question in there that staff necessarily needs to respond to, but it sounds like this is a good opportunity for all of us to make clear where our heads are at as we move forward with this ongoing conversation about where we are with our budget. Manny, I see you've unmuted yourself. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Now, I just want to thank the staff, obviously, for all the work that you guys have been doing through these times, working remotely. I'm sure a lot of hours go through that. Do want to kind of piggyback on some of the stuff was said. And I want to remind my colleagues that Karen did send an email I want to say about a week ago, Karen, in regards to the priorities that she put a list together. So that could be a beginning of our conversation in regards to what the capital projects we should be looking. And I agree with you, Omar, on that. And kind of, but in the same token, we are responsible for a budget. So how do we balance this whole going forward with this? I am going to support RICA. We should not be hiring anybody, obviously, at this time, as much as we would like to give that opportunity to people that do not have a job and bring them to our village. But I don't think it would be a smart move in our end. I do have a quick question for Karen. Is I know this part-time help that we had in the past. Some of the stuff, I think we don't have that anymore at this point. I'm assuming that's something that was eliminated.
So our part-time staff, which was mostly non-essential staff who couldn't perform functions under the current restrictions, we did an analysis. Right now, furloughing them actually provides them, because there's government benefits coming in that we're actually not responsible. It's a good deal for them, and it saves cost saving for the village. So we're already saving. Dale, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're saving $16,000 a pay period on the furloughing of part-time staff. Right now, most people are working in some capacity. I think that the best way to approach this, and it's really what the approach that we're taking is, obviously we're not hiring during this time because we really couldn't, even if we wanted to, at this point. The bulk of our capital projects are put on hold because of the situation that we're in. So I think that we have our fixed costs that we know that we have to spend. And then we also have our capital projects, our priority projects, and we can look at and weight them. Dale and Tom are very conservative when they do their budgets to begin with. So there's usually, they are very good at under promising and over delivering on certain things. So that's a real strength, and I applaud them for that because it comes in handy right now. What we have to look at most seriously is what's going to protect the continued fiscal health. We have a good fund balance right now. This is what a good fund balance is for. There are some unknowns, but we are planning for worst case scenarios. So as we go through this, and I think that's why we wanted to start the conversation today, have a more in-depth conversation where we can actually look at I think the variable budget line items that would make most sense to reevaluate for the board to reconsider. then I think that we can continue with again, preparing for the worst, anticipating the worst and hoping for better than the worst. I don't think we're going to anticipate for the best here, but we'll anticipate for better than the worst. So based on what I'm hearing you, I think that very much of what we're doing is in line with the direction of the board. Again, as far as expenditures go, we're really not, certainly not adding expenses other than those that we need to because it's COVID related, and that we're tracking very, very closely because that would, that's subject to reimbursement, FEMA funds, other programs. So we're looking at that as well.
So may I ask a general question? And I don't want to go too much into the details because we can take that opportunity to go another time in regards to capital projects. But capital projects is not just about projects; it's about equipment as well. Correct. So and that wasn't really focused on the email, I believe, of my recollection of what you had before. So based on that, there are some capital projects about equipment that was approved early in the year. Yes, Tom, maybe? I believe a few.
Yes, there was, it was more than $900,000 in equipment purchases that was approved to be paid for from 2019 fund balance. Some of those projects are in the works with issued purchase orders to purchase the items. Some of them haven't even been converted to a department requisition. So those are most likely the ones that we can immediately put on hold for a while if we evaluate what they are. And then there was also the bond resolution. I think that was $580,000 for a six-wheel dump truck and the bucket truck and 2 Mason dump trucks.
Okay. Yeah, again, if we can put that into a bigger conversation, I think for us to understand what does that mean, I will ask for that to, obviously from the board supports and the staff, that everything to be put on hold at this point of time, and then we can obviously look into this with more details and what makes sense and what doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page here.
Bob Fritchie, I see your camera is off, but if you can hear me, if you want to chime in with any questions or comments, please do before I make my final comments and we move on. Oh, there you are.
Sorry about that. I was trying to hook my headphones up. No, I'm good right now.
Okay. Then the only things that I'll say in closing on this subject, every time we talk about budgets, it's a learning experience for all of us. This is obviously unprecedented times for so many reasons. Rika's terminology that she wants to open up the budget, I think when Karen said, there are some items that have some, I don't know what your term was, it wasn't flexibility, but some
fixed cost. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Fixed cost.
Right. Well, it was the opposite. It was the other ones that I was trying to refer to. But
variable costs.
Variable. That was the word. Thank you, Rika. About 75% of our budget is staff wages, salaries, and benefits. So that's pretty locked in for all of our full-time staff, other than the part-time staff that we were just talking about, as well as camp is still up in the air. So as a parent who depends on summer camp for my children, I don't know how I could possibly work. It's driving me crazy to have them in the house every hour of the day right now. I'm hoping that by the summer, I can get them out of the house for 6 or 7 hours of the day. And the only way I can afford to do it is with the Ossining Municipal Camp. So I understand that we're getting recommendations from the county to just hold off on things. What is the date certain by which the village, and maybe you can't answer this tonight, so I'm just posing the question and you can talk to Bill and get back to us. I know they've got a lot of staff they've had to hire and train, and they've got a lot of planning to do, and they'd have to really up their game and getting people to sign up for it. I realize mobilizing these things, is not something you can do on a dime. So what is the date by which we will know either go ahead, register for camp, or we've got to pull the plug. Here's your money back. It's not happening. You're stuck with your children until September.
So,
I love them, but my God, it's not enough.
I think there's a couple of, things that I want to talk to Bill about. So, based on when camp typically starts, I think we're getting very close to that date where we'd have to say we're not going to be able to pull this together in time. It is not looking good based on the conversations that we've heard. So if there was a way to do a different type of camp schedule that maybe was more condensed weeks towards the end of the summer, that's something, those are like sort of options we have to look at. It is a couple of weeks of getting people recruited and everything. So, you need, I'd have to talk to Bill to really, but I think you need at least a solid month lead time. I mean, they are working on some of this, but they can't interview anybody right now, really. They can and they can't because they can't make it's a very, very, very challenging situation because we're really, we're in a holding pattern that's difficult for everyone. So again, if we can be maybe more creative in the way we stage our camp in terms of timing based on how long this situation runs, then that could be an option. There may be some other things we can do. Again, we do have operating costs that are not as flexible, and those are actually very, very important right now because we are continuing to pick up the garbage. We are continuing to do the things that during a viral epidemic are very, very important to do. So that's where our essential staff is focusing their efforts in the operational end, and then for the administrative end, for the finance, the budgeting, the payroll, all that stuff too. So it really does come down to sort of programmatic things and capital, whether it's equipment, whether it's actual capital, bricks and mortar expansion. Probably where we have the biggest opportunity to decrease our expenses. And again, we're already looking at that with great scrutiny. I wish I had an answer for you, and I wish there were more options. So, but we'll work on it.
So I just want to philosophically, I mean, I'm joking about my own needs as a parent of adolescents, but the reality is camp, and it's in the same category as the Youth Bureau, which is something Rika and I have talked about. I'm glad she mentioned that. Everything is more difficult to move forward. The Youth Bureau is something that we committed to a year ago, and we have every intention of moving forward. But camp and the Youth Bureau, if we're going to dedicate very precious taxpayer dollars as soon as possible to get things up and running, having programming for youth in Ossining, and I'm not talking about my kids, I'm talking about the kids that are not going to be going on any summer vacations, and they're stuck at home right now, and that's pretty unusual. Being able to go to camp every day and have positive role models and opportunities to be outdoors and have activities is essential for their physical health, for their safety, for their mental health, for their development. And so if we're going to be dedicating funds to something, that's where I want to be focusing the dedication of funds. And while there's a lot that can't be happening right now, these things that can be happening with emails and Zoom conversations to line up these sort of programs so that when everybody is allowed out in the world again, that kids have a safe place to go, that's where I'd like us to be focusing any staff time or attention while people are working remotely. Is that consistent with what you see as viable options? Not
I think
so
that,
camp, but the Youth Bureau and any programming.
I mean, there's no question that they're viable options and that those programs would be really important on so many levels, allowing parents to go back to work, bringing back to the community, so many things that they would be so important. I think the biggest challenge is that while there's, and again, this is something I have to talk, without knowing when camp starts and without being able to commit to people, it makes it hard to line up certain things. I'm not saying that we couldn't, because a lot of this is kids in high school and things that, I don't know how many other options they're going to have if this continues. So we may be able to tee up some things and without any guarantees, and then have a group that we can call on should we all be able to go out on, June 21st, which I hope we can. So there is probably some of that work. I think that a lot of the work that we can do on the Youth Bureau, we've already talked to, Bill about the stakeholder engagement, getting the bylaws written, and working with the county and doing, sort of some of the administrative stuff that we need to do. There's no reason why we can't continue to do that.
Good.
So a personal interview is always great, but a Zoom interview is absolutely feasible. Those are things that we are looking at, and I think that based on all the considerations we've had and where we are right now, the outlook is conservatively optimistic for not being dire straits. Is that, Tom and Dale, would you say that articulates it correctly? I'm not sure how we, I don't want to, give any false reassurances here, but again, we have a healthy fund balance. We run a tight ship. We're conservative on a good day. So I think that what our goal would be is every day, we'd be able to make decisions on what we can do based where we are. And if the board prioritizes programs over capital improvements, then that's where we'll focus the resources that we have, should they become available. Should they be available. If they're available, I don't see any reason why we can't do that.
Well, it sounds like that's what I'm proposing, and I don't know where my colleagues stand on that.
Dale and Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you said it well.
So does anybody else? Rick, I see you're unmuted.
Well, no, I was listening. I think Manny sort of in a different way said something very similar, because he brought up, all the capital projects. Do we really need to say? And I've already said in my piece, I've always said what I believe about the community center. It's the only open, truly open place in the community where everybody can come together. I would say seniors, not just the kids. And I would say that you will not have any problems finding help this summer. That may have been the story last year and the year before during the boom economy. That will not be the case. And you will be able to start much more quickly than in the past. And you might want to consider, now that the place is open 7 days, that because people no longer work just Mondays to Fridays, that there might be parents who would be very excited to have camp run on the weekend, or, in different days of the week. There might be options, even if it starts later in the summer. So I think, from my perspective, should be able to open camp. It just won't look exactly the way it has in the past, but nothing's going to look this way it's looked in the past. We have the facility, the youth board, I think I already had mentioned, and I'm mostly in agreement. I do want to get more data. I mean, one of the things I'm concerned about is the data that we have. I want to make decisions based on actual data. It's okay for me to use my other professional life and say, this is what I see being done out there. I had a question. I mean, I think I don't need to do it in the public. I want to understand more about the furloughs, because I thought there was a limit on how much that goes. I thought there was like an 8-week limit to that, but I don't think we need to get into the weeds on that, Karen. I'll just call you to get a better, just for my own sake, to get a better understanding. I don't think it has something to do with the long-term budgets, which is the conversation at hand. I'm optimistic, by the way, that the camps will start. I think they're going to start a couple of weeks later than they have in the past, but it's also, I believe, a very long summer. Wasn't the summer originally like a 10-week summer? It's an unusually long summer to begin with, actually. So it's really important that we get it off the ground.
It's been an unusually long year, so that would make sense.
It's been a very long decade this month. March was a very long decade for all of us, and it seems like we're going to get through it soon. I hope.
Okay. Without a crystal ball, but we are working on anticipating that we are, right now the plans are in place to go forward with these things till we find out we can't, but we're also making sure we're not expending money that commits us to things that may not happen. So with that said, I think we can address the questions that the board have. We already talked to the department heads about prioritizing things that, you know, the have-tos versus the it would be good to do this. And that's helped us focus on, you know, where we have the most flexibility. Again, thanks to the very good work of our finance team and responsible practices overall, we're in a better place than some. So,
I have a question, Karen, only because Paul, I see, is still with us. So the roads, we budgeted a lot of money to fix roads and curbs. I had to be somewhere today, and I noticed that in Hartsdale, in White Plains, there's construction going on. So I guess that must mean, I don't know if there was emergency, so I didn't stop and ask the guys. Are we able to do the roads? And I only asked that on two levels. Number one, should we? We allotted a lot of money, Paul, but in the budget. But again, we just had a conversation about where can we save. It's just that the roads are empty. We always have such problems in blocking up school buses, and we can't go down Main Street during commutation hours. Honestly, the roads are, as you all know, are empty. This is an ideal scenario for fixing our roads. Different from a financial conversation, and it's getting nice out. So do we have a plan about roads and sidewalks right now, given those scenarios?
So in discussing this with Manager Dettori, we both understand the governor's latest response to not to include construction work, and that's, I think, why you see it going on in White Plains and other places. However, we also considered what we're talking about now, the economic impact, and then the impact of social separation and how that really is tough to keep in place during large-scale construction projects like that. So it didn't become a monetary issue at that point. It became, you know, locally, we were looking to do our part by maintaining that and maintaining a little more comfort with the budget itself. Some of the monies in place that Tom referred to earlier, the $400,000, I think, that were from village funds. Even if we did set those aside and decide not to spend those, there's other funding streams for road work, paving and concrete work for curbing and sidewalks that are not in the village budget. As of right now, the 2020 CHIPS allocations to the local municipalities is still in the state budget, and so is the extreme weather increase to that money. We haven't seen anything to indicate that that is going to be taken out of the budget. But again, everybody's going through this for the first time, so we don't know for sure. So in summary of all that, what the manager and I discussed were what would be she had asked me what would be the, would there be an issue if paving and road work was put off till the late summer and early fall, and certainly not. The contract is already in place. I've reviewed some of the work that I hope to accomplish already as far as which road. And we can afford to wait a couple of months before we decide if we want to move forward or not with that work to keep it. But if there's an emergency situation on the road, like a road collapse or road restoration that is necessitated by a water main break or what have you, obviously we're going to respond to that and repair that. But right now, the entire Department of Public Works staff is focused on doing administrative work. We're doing some capital work as far as the administrative component of that to get things ready for capital. And then it's really all hands on deck to take care of sanitation and recyclables as separate as possible as they can and in a safe manner as they can, and then get out of here and get on home and do our local part to support the keeping people at home and separate.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is there's, we're going to be continuing this conversation next week and delving a little more into capital projects. When we talk specifically about paving, Tom or Dale suggested that we could do what was originally anticipated, which is to use some fund balance that was left from last year, or we could bond for it. We can, when we talk about it, I'll just go on record saying, God, I don't want to scale back on our paving. That's something that is just such a high priority for people in our community. That would be felt immediately, but you know, everything's on the table for us to look at. So this is clearly going to be an ongoing conversation. We'll talk more about capital projects, whether it's vehicles or projects like this, if they're going to go forward and how they're going to be paid for. So thanks everybody for looking through this in such an in-depth way this week, and I know it's something that we take very seriously, and we'll look at again next week.
I have
All
a
right.
quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to Karen. Karen, can you confirm that essentially we're waiting for the governor's orders about how to proceed? I'm talking about camps and programs and stuff like that. We're waiting for the governor's orders about like how many people you can have in a space and that kind of thing, and then that would be the directive. We're not waiting for us to make a decision on that. Is that right?
No. This decision is not in our control.
Right. Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Right, because we don't know if people are going to be allowed to congregate, at what point they'll be allowed, and we can't start hiring people to work at a camp that may or may not take place.
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Right.
yeah.
All right. We'll talk more next week. Thank you so much. What's up next, Karen?
What's up next? I think that what's up next is we have Corporation Counsel, Stuart Kahan, talking about possible revision to the village code to accept partial payment for water and sewer charges. And water charges and sewer rents. So,
Mayor, if I might, I note that it is 10:20. And we also have executive session and advice of counsel with people who are going to be calling in. I just wonder if you want to defer these two topics till next week as new business, or I'm prepared to talk. I'm just saying that we're already 3 hours into the meeting. So I leave it up to the board.
That is a fine idea with me. Do the trustees feel comfortable postponing the discussions on these? We do have emails on some of this information that we could be asking questions over the course of the week so that the new business conversation can take place in an informed manner. Are people okay
I'm
with
voting
that?
thumbs up.
All right,
My new
we're
voting
good.
structure.
Yes, awesome.
Thank
Yes,
you.
we will add these to new business for next week. Thank you, Stuart. That was very considerate. So
Thank you, ma'am.
that's the end of the agenda, right? Okay, does anybody have any final words, anything that we need to know, the public needs to know before we have a motion to move to executive session? Okay. I will just say thank you very much to everybody who participated in this very thoughtful, in-depth conversation. And I will request a motion to adjourn to executive session for matters of...
This is matters of real property.
Okay.
And I thought personnel.
And advice of counsel.
It's advice of counsel.
Yeah, that's not exact though.
And Maddie, you're going to touch base with everybody?
Is there anything, but is there anything on personnel? Would this be considered personnel or is it advice of counsel? Anyway.
It's not, because it does involve a specific person, so it can be that way as well.
Okay.
It has multitask.
So we have the motion for executive session for real property and perhaps also matters of personnel related to a specific person.
Thank you.
I'll move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And with that, we say thank you very much. Happy Passover and a happy Easter to everyone. Before we see you next week, we'll be back at our usual Wednesday time at our new normal Zoom virtual village board meeting. Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned to exec.